You won't believe what happened to a man who thought his life would be lived out in silence, surrounded only by the whisper of the wind and the creak of wooden fences on a lonely ranch until one stormy evening when 11 unexpected guests arrived at his doorstep, and his world was never the same again. This is the story of Jack Turner, a single father who had spent years in solitude after life tore away the love of his life, leaving him with nothing but a quiet ranch, fading photographs, and memories that never seemed to let him rest. Jack wasn't always a recluse once upon a time. He was the kind of man whose laughter filled every room, whose love for his wife Emily was so strong that people envied the bond they shared, and whose pride in his little daughter Lily was brighter than the Texas sun that warmed their land. But life doesn't care about perfect families, and tragedy has a cruel way of cutting into the strongest hearts. Jack lost Emily in a car accident when Lily was only 6. And though the little girl's smile was enough to keep him moving forward, the pain etched itself into Jack's soul like an invisible scar. He worked the ranch, cared for Lily, and built walls around his heart so high that even the warmest kindness from neighbors couldn't climb over them. When Lily grew older, she left for college in the city, chasing her dreams with her father's quiet blessing. And just like that, the house became emptier than ever, filled with echoes of laughter that no longer existed, the clinking of spoons against mugs of coffee Jack drank alone, and the heavy silence of nights that seemed longer than the days. He had resigned himself to this life. He had just a man, his ranch, and memories that refused to fade. But fate was about to test him, because sometimes life brings storms that don't just threaten to destroy, but to rebuild. It was late autumn, the kind of season when the air smelled of dry leaves and wood smoke, and the skies shifted too quickly between calm and fury. That evening, Jack had been mending a broken fence when thunder rumbled far off, and the horizon grew black. By the time he reached the porch, the rain had begun to pour in sheets, rattling against the tin roof and drenching the earth in minutes. He was about to retreat inside when he saw headlights cutting through the rain, bouncing along the muddy road that led to his property. His first thought was confusion, and no one ever visited him anymore. Then concern crept in. Who would be out in weather like this? The truck pulled up, followed by another, then another. Jack squinted through the downpour until he could make out figures stepping out, dressed in fatigues, carrying heavy packs, their faces streaked with rain. Soldiers, women, 11 of them in total, moving together as if trained to survive in worse than this. They made their way toward his porch, their boots sinking in mud, their shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Jack opened the door, half cautious, half bewildered, as the lead soldier stepped forward, saluted out of habit, and said, "Sir, we're sorry to intrude. We were on our way to base, but the storm forced us off the road. Our vehicle's stuck, and we need shelter for the night." Jack hesitated. His heart, walled off for so long, didn't know what to do with the sight of these strangers, these women whose eyes carried stories he couldn't yet read. He could have said number. He could have closed the door and let the storm swallow them. But something in the way they stood there, wet, weary, and yet dignified, awoke something in him he hadn't felt in years. Responsibility for someone other than himself. He stepped aside and said, "Come in." The ranch house, once quiet and lonely, suddenly came alive with voices, boots stomping on the floor, and the sound of dripping clothes being wrung out. Jack lit the fireplace, and as the flames grew, so did the warmth that had been missing from his home. The soldiers introduced themselves, one by O'Neill, Sergeant Maria, tough but with kind eyes Claire, a medic with gentle hands Jenna, the youngest, barely 22 but already hardened by service, and others, each with her own strength, her own silence, her own hidden pain. They spoke respectfully, but their exhaustion was clear. Jack brought out blankets, cooked what little food he had stored, and watched as these strangers slowly let their guard down, sitting together around the fire, laughing softly, grateful for dry clothes and warmth. And in the middle of it all, Jack felt something shift in the air of his home, like the house itself was remembering how to breathe. That night, as rain battered the windows, Jack sat back and listened to their stories. They talked about deployments, about camaraderie, about the bonds they shared that kept them standing when the world grew too heavy. They didn't reveal everything, but they revealed enough. And Jack, who had guarded his soul for years, found himself sharing pieces of his own life via Emily, Lily. The loneliness that filled the ranch like a shadow. He hadn't spoken about it to anyone in so long that the words felt strange, yet freeing. The soldiers listened with respect, some with tears in their eyes, others nodding in quiet understanding. They knew loss, too. They knew sacrifice. And in that moment, Jack wasn't just a host, he was part of something larger than his pain. The storm raged on for hours, making it impossible for them to leave. By morning, the roads were flooded, and the vehicles still trapped in mud. One night turned into 2, then 3, and with each passing day, the walls of Jack's heart crumbled a little more. The soldiers helped on the ranch, fixing fences, tending to animals, cooking meals, and filling the house with life again. For the first time in years, Jack heard laughter echo across the land, footsteps running across the porch, voices singing softly while they worked. He saw 11 women who carried burdens as heavy as his own, yet still managed to smile, to care, to live. And he realized how much he had missed being part of something alive. But as days stretched on, Jack also began to feel something unexpected stirring deep inside, the flicker of emotions he thought had died with Emily. It wasn't love yet, but it was something close, admiration, respect, the quiet ache of connection. These women weren't just soldiers, they were survivors, warriors who had walked through fire and still managed to bring warmth to his lonely home. And for the first time, Jack wondered if maybe life was offering him a second chance, not to replace what he lost, but to add something new. Still, fear lingered. What if letting them in meant opening wounds he couldn't handle? What if attachment only led to more pain? Jack wrestled with these thoughts in silence, watching the soldiers as they worked, shared stories, and filled his ranch with energy he hadn't felt in years. And all the while, a question whispered in the back of his mind. Was this storm just a coincidence, or was it fate bringing him back to life? The second morning after the storm broke with a pale golden sunrise, the ranch bathed in light as if the sky itself was trying to wipe away the memory of rain. But Jack Turner's heart knew the storm had only just begun, because the presence of those 11 women was stirring something inside him that he hadn't felt in years, something both terrifying and comforting at the same time. The soldiers rose early, their discipline showing even when stranded far from base, and he watched through the window as they moved across his land with a sense of purpose, splitting into groups, some tending to the animals, some clearing fallen branches, and others trying to free their vehicles from the thick mud. Jack had lived alone for so long that the sight of other people moving about his land was surreal. The ranch, once a quiet stage where he performed every task in solitude, now throbbed with life, with voices calling out to each other, laughter carrying across the fields, and boots stamping against the earth. For the first time in years, the house and the land felt less like a tomb and more like a home, and Jack couldn't deny that he was starting to like it, though admitting it even to himself felt like betraying the silence he had wrapped around his heart for so long. That afternoon, Sergeant Maria approached him with a straightforwardness Jack admired. She was strong, steady, and spoke with the calm authority of a woman who had led people through storms far worse than the one that had stranded them here. "Mr. Turner," she said, standing on the porch with her boots muddy and her hair damp with sweat, "we can't say for sure when we'll be able to leave. The roads are a mess, and our transport is unreliable. I need to ask if we can stay until conditions improve." Jack met her gaze, saw the weight she carried, the responsibility she felt for her team. And though part of him feared what it would mean to extend their stay, another part of him, the part that had been slowly thawing, and nodded. "As long as you need," he replied, surprising even himself with how easily the words came. That night, as the fire crackled in the hearth and the soldiers gathered around the table, Jack realized he had made a choice not just to offer shelter, but to let them into his life, however temporary it might be. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of the ranch began to change. The soldiers brought energy and order, their camaraderie filling the emptiness that had defined Jack's life for so long. Claire, the medic, discovered Jack's old medical kit and began tending not just to the soldiers' scraps and blisters but even to the animals when they needed care, her gentle touch breathing compassion into every action. Jenna, the youngest of the group, had a boundless curiosity, and she peppered Jack with questions about ranch life, learning quickly and throwing herself into chores with enthusiasm that made Jack chuckle despite himself. Others revealed unexpected talents. One had an knack for cooking, another for carpentry, another for music, and soon the house was alive not just with conversation but with songs, the smell of fresh bread, and the sound of hammers repairing things Jack had long neglected. The ranch, once fading into disrepair, began to bloom under their care, and with every improvement, Jack felt a piece of his own spirit stitching itself back together. But it wasn't just the work that changed him up, it was the connection. At night, around the fire, stories flowed. The women spoke about deployments, about fear and courage, about friendships forged in the crucible of war. They spoke about the families they missed, the homes they longed for, the dreams they still held on to despite the weight of their duties. And Jack listened, his heart swelling with respect, his loneliness slowly dissolving as he realized he was no longer just a host, but part of a circle, part of something larger than himself. In return, he shared more of his own story, his love for Emily, his pride in Lily, the pain of losing one and the ache of letting the other go. Sometimes his voice broke, sometimes the words came haltingly, but they listened with patience and empathy, and in their eyes he saw understanding that reached deeper than words. These women, hardened by battles, carried their own scars, and in sharing them, they gave Jack permission to finally lay his burdens down.